I'm OS121, and I'm presenting an original series, Was It Me? Made by me. I felt a sting in my hand in the water, and I pulled my arm back to see a cut in my hand with blood running off of it. I liked it. Have you ever had a nightmare where you wake up in a cold sweat? Has it ever been of you? I have, but I lived it for 3 years. On the corner of 15th Street in Monroe, Wisconsin, I lived with my father, and my stepmother and my siblings. My relationship with my father wasn't the best. Our conversations were awkward, and we couldn't spend too much time in the same room together. My stepmom was a very thick-skulled woman, and it was either her way or the highway. My relationships with my siblings was the same as any other siblings. At least it was for a while. My stepmother, Dawn, she would be very harsh to me whenever my father went off on business trips. And every day I would have a chore list to do, every single day. And, you know, kids, they sometimes forget or do it half-assed. But anytime that would happen, she would come upstairs, drag me downstairs, and say, "Why aren't you doing your chores?" I'm sorry, I forgot. Apologies were never enough for her. Then, when my dad would come home, she'd only tell him all of the bad things that I did that week. Nothing good. I felt something new. I was sad. Like I wasn't enough for them. Eventually, my dad got a promotion, and he had to go on a lot more business trips. But even when he was home, my stepmother was now harsher to me than she was before. And she would do the exact same thing that she would do whenever he was off of his business trip, and he would just stand there and watch. Or he would walk away and not look. One day, I was doing the dishes. I felt a prick on my hand, and I pulled out my hand, and I was bleeding. And I liked it. That's when the cutting began. I started wearing more hoodies to cover up my scars and my cuts. And anytime my friends would see it and ask me, they'd say, "What happened?" And I would say, "Oh, I tripped," or, you know, "the knife got me while I was doing the dishes." The cutting became more vigorous, and they were deeper and more. My father, they would ground me, and I would just go up in my room anyway and hide in there. Eventually, I tried committing suicide, and I tried jumping out the window, but as soon as I did, my stepmother grabbed my ankle and pulled me back in. "Why would you act so stupid?" I looked at her and I said, I don't feel like I'm wanted here. I don't feel loved." She called my father. That night when he came home, they sat me down in the kitchen. They had a talk to me about suicide. They were saying how cowardly it is to commit suicide, how committing suicide is just not dealing with life. They say my uncle was a coward. A few years ago, my uncle committed suicide. And then they proceeded to tell me that my mother didn't love me. And that was the reason why I was there. I clenched my jaw. And as though I felt a burning rage inside of me, but I knew I had to hold it and keep my composure. I went upstairs like nothing happened. After a year, things went off the deep end. My grades went to the floor, and I didn't care anymore. There was a fight that me and my stepmother had where We were fighting, and she was going to hit me, and I stayed away from her. And she said, "Come here." I walked away, trying to avoid her at all costs, and eventually she pushed the table towards me, and I snapped. I pushed the table towards her, towards the refrigerator, and I slammed her up against the wall, and I said, "If you touch me ever again, I will kill you in your sleep." She called my father again. A couple days, he came home, and right when he came home, I was whipped senseless. Eventually, I went to go see my mother for Christmas break. And I told her, if living with my dad is too much for me to handle, I'm going to call you. And it happened. There was a day where me and Dawn got another fight. And she said, "You know what, I'm leaving." And she stormed out of the house. My father came in and he said, "Thanks. My wife just left me." He was more worried about his wife than me, his firstborn son. I called my mother. I said, "I can't live here anymore." She said, "Fine, but you have to speak to your father about it." Time went past and I pushed it off as much as I could, but there was a day that I had a perfect opportunity. My stepmother and my siblings were off doing something, and me and my father were home alone. Might as well do it. I walked up to my father and I said, "Dad, I need to talk to you." He looked at me and he's like, "Okay, shoot." "I want to go live with Mom again." He just looked at me. My father was known for being emotionless. And all I could see was his face turning red. And he looked at me and he said very calmly, "That's what you want." He turned from me, heading towards his bedroom. And on the toy shelf next to him, he slammed all the toys onto the floor, went over to his bedroom and slammed the door behind him. I was scared. I ran up to my room and locked myself in. My stepmother came home and she came in my room and she said, "What did you do to your father?" She eventually went back downstairs, but of course, she left a mess in her wake. She threw all of my belongings on the floor and flipped my bed and took all of my dresses and threw them onto the floor. I went downstairs after dinner to do dishes as normal and try and play it off like nothing happened. And they called me into the living room. I walked into the living room, and they were both sitting on the couch. "So tell us, why do you want to move to your mom so badly?" I knew exactly what I had to say. "No, the reason I want to move to my mom's is because I don't feel like I belong here. I don't feel loved. And my siblings hate me. And even when I told you, what did you say?" Can you really blame them? It was the last week that I was there, and it was the end of school. The thing I remember was saying all of my goodbyes. And it wasn't that hard saying goodbye, but it was just the fact that I was leaving all of my friends, the family that I made by myself, the people that I cared about. Not my family, they were my family. As they hugged me and said goodbye, I promised them that I would be back no matter what. The last couple of days I went over to my aunt's house, and I was hanging out with my cousin Mark. You know, playing video games, riding bikes around town, doing what normal kids do. And on the third day, my aunt came to me and she said, "Do you not want to go back there?" She knew as well as I what the answer was going to be. No. I don't feel love there. And as soon as that happened, the phone rang. We looked at each other and we both know who it was. She walked over, picked up the phone. As the conversation went on, she started looking more and more grim. I didn't know what was going on, so I just went with it. She came over to me and said, "I'm sorry, but you have to go home." I didn't know what, I didn't understand, but I didn't complain. We went over to Orangeville, Illinois, where we would usually meet. And there she was, and we pulled up and did the switch like we normally did. As I saw my aunt drifting off into the distance, I looked over at my stepmother, and she was staring at me. "Come on, let's go," I said. I looked over again, and she was still staring at me. "Come on, I don't want to be here." She looked over at me and she started crying. Usually, whenever she would start crying, it would give me immense pleasure, but something felt off. It didn't feel normal. Her best friend Jacob committed suicide last night. That's a really funny joke. That's not okay. I looked back in the van and I saw my sister was crying too. This wasn't a joke. This actually happened. We went home and all I remember was me going up in my room and sitting down on my bed and crying the entire night. The day before I left, I found out my best friend committed suicide. Just like my uncle. I got on the plane and went to Salt Lake City. As I got off the plane, I saw my mom. And I hugged her. I had thought of how happy I am to be home. But what cost did I have to go through to be here?